Hey guys, tonight we're going to time travel somewhere truly disturbing. No dragons, no wars, no haunted castles, just the plain nose-wrinkling reality of Victorian hygiene. Or more accurately, the absolute lack of it. And fair warning, you probably won't survive this. Not because of violence or ghosts, but because the smell alone would knock you flat. We're talking about a time when soap was suspect, toothpaste was. Well, we'll get there, and flushing toilets were a bold fantasy. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Let me know in the comments what city you're listening from and what time it is right now. I'll be here imagining the scent of boiled cabbage and coal smoke. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You arrive in London in 1850. The very air greets you like an aggressive handshake from a stranger who hasn't bathed in a while. Equal parts fog, soot, horse manure, and the oily stink of too many bodies too close together. You take a cautious breath through your nose, regret it immediately, and try mouth breathing instead. Nope, worse. The air tastes like warm pennies and something faintly eggy. Welcome. Your shoes sink slightly into the zin, the slick layer of filth coating the cobblestones. It's a mix of ash, hay, dung, spit, and whatever's been dumped out of windows lately. Speaking of which, splat. You sidestep instinctively just as a chamber pot's worth of night soil crashes down onto the street nearby. A woman 2 floors up yells, "Gardalee!" a full second too late. A common courtesy, supposedly. You're not dressed for the 19th century, so people are staring. But even if you were in period-appropriate woolen boots, they'd still know you're not from around here. You're way too clean. Your hair doesn't smell like smoke. You're not actively sweating brownish liquid through every layer of clothing. Suspicious. You wander down a market lane. Everything is too close. Stalls, people, livestock. Yes, livestock. There's a goat eating what might be a shoe. A toddler with a runny nose and bare feet waddles by holding a dead fish like a prize. It's unclear where the shops end and the chaos begins. And the smells. Sweet decay from a fruit stall. Raw blood from the butcher's block and something acrid and smoky drifting from a nearby chimney sweep's cart. You consider breathing through your sleeve. It doesn't help. A fact for you. By the mid-1800s, London's population had ballooned to over 2 million. That's a lot of people and even more body odour in a city without working plumbing. The Thames served as both drinking water and an open sewer. That's right, the same river. Imagine the homes around you are stacked like mouldy bricks, narrow and leaning inside. They're dark, humid and crawling with life. Literally fleas, lice and rats the size of dachshunds. You hear scratching from behind a boarded window. Probably nothing. Definitely not a family of raccoons living behind the wallpaper. Raccoons weren't even native here. Yet somehow, you wouldn't be surprised. Let's talk about chimneys for a second. Every home has one, and they're rarely cleaned. So most are lined with soot and probably hiding several terrified children. Yes, children forced to wriggle inside to scrape the insides clean. Their faces are always smudged black, their lungs permanently damaged by age 10. A quirky Victorian job, if a potential death trap qualifies as quirky. You pause by a water pump where a line of people are filling buckets. A boy dips a tin cup and offers you a drink. Don't do it. The water looks okay, but it's crawling with bacteria. Germ theory isn't mainstream yet. People don't boil water. They assume bad smells cause disease, not invisible microbes. This is the golden age of the miasma theory, where if something sticks, it must be deadly. The irony, of course, is that plenty of things don't smell at all but will kill you, like cholera and lead pipes, and well, most of what you're currently surrounded by. There's a polite little debate happening right now among 19th century scientists and city officials. Some think the city needs a massive overhaul of its sewage system. Others think that's an expensive waste since the stink isn't what's causing the death toll. They argue in pamphlets, in Parliament, and in newspapers while corpses quietly pile up in the meantime. Spoiler, the reformers are right. But it'll take a few more years and one very bad summer to force change. As you keep walking, you notice your skin feels sticky. Your hair is already greasy, even though it was fine an hour ago. That's just the city clinging to you, bonding like a needy ex, and you're barely 15 minutes in. A man with mutton chops bumps into you and mutters something unintelligible. His hat smells like pipe smoke. His coat smells like wet dog. He smells like everyone else. You want to flee, but instead you press forward. You're here for the long haul. 30 sections of historical grime, sweat, and the occasional bucket of mystery liquid dumped from above. Fun. Also a weird detail. Victorians loved to cover smells more than eliminate them. Vinegar was big, so was lavender oil. And if you had money, you'd spritz yourself with something floral and hope no one noticed the bee underneath. In other words, hygiene was theatre. Scent was strategy. Actual cleanliness is optional. You reach a city square where street performers are gathering a crowd. One man eats fire, another juggles rats. Seriously, rats. A cluster of ragged kids shout at him to make them dance. One throws a crust of bread which the rats chase with grim enthusiasm. You consider clapping, then realise your hands might stick together from whatever residue they've picked up already. Maybe later, and that's just day one. The moment you arrived, the city's grime started to own you. Your socks feel damp, your breath tastes like coal, and your dignity, let's just say it's going the way of the temps. But hey, at least no one expects you to smile. Dentistry is its own horror show, and we're saving that gem for a little later. You wake up, if we can call it that, wrapped in a coarse, itchy blanket that smells like wet sheep and ancient soup. You're lying on a lumpy straw mattress that sighs audibly under your weight, as though it too has had enough of Victorian life. The window is cracked open an inch for fresh air, which means you're getting an icy draft and the delightful aroma of manure wafting up from the streets below. Morning in 1842, London has arrived, and you're already regretting it. Now you need to bathe. That's what your 21st century brain insists anyway. But here's the thing, nobody baths daily or weekly. In fact, a full bath might happen once a month if you're wealthy, bored, and mildly masochistic. And even then, the bath itself is less a cleansing ritual and more a process of stewing in your own grime like a human teabag. You look around your lodgings. There's no bathroom, no sink, no running water of any kind. Just a dented pitcher of cold water sitting on a warped wooden table and a cracked ceramic basin beside it. This is your entire hygiene setup. You dip your fingers in and splash a bit on your face. It's not refreshing. It's freezing and vaguely metallic, and you're pretty sure you just woke up a colony of something microscopic. Downstairs, your host is boiling a kettle over the fireplace, which doubles as heating, lighting, and a minor cremation risk. She offers to warm some water for a bath for a fee, of course. This involves dragging a zinc tub from the wall, filling it with several kettles of water carried bucket by bucket from the well, and then guarding the door from nosy neighbours. privacy is rare, warmth is temporary, and so is the bath water. You're sharing it with everyone else in the household. Eldest first, then down the line. If you're last, you're basically dipping yourself into lukewarm soup. Here's a fun historical fact. The phrase, "don't throw the baby out with the bathwater," comes from this exact scenario. By the time the baby got its turn in the tub, the water was so murky you could genuinely lose a child in there. It wasn't metaphorical. It was just Tuesday. Let's say you go through with it. You sit in the tub, knees pressed to your chest, trying not to think about how many people have soaked in this water before you. The soap is a mysterious grey puck that smells like lard and sadness. It doesn't lather, it just smears across your skin like grease, which might actually be what it's made from. Your hair, there's no shampoo, not really. You might get lucky and find a bar labelled hair soap, which is basically the same as the other soap but in a different wrapper. Washing your hair in the Victorian era is an ordeal. First, you soak it. Then you scrub it with something alkaline, usually soap or a homemade solution of baking soda and vinegar if you're feeling fancy. Then you try to rinse it out with cold, hard water that leaves your hair crunchy. You'll be picking soap chunks out of your scalp for days, which is probably why most people don't bother more than once a month. Speaking of hair, remember that quirky fringe fact? Victorians sometimes use stale beer or beef marrow to nourish their locks. That's right, beer on your head. The idea was that it added volume and shine. The result is you smell like a pub floor and attract every fly within a 5-metre radius. Now let's pause for a moment to appreciate just how deeply people feared water during this time. Yes, water. Clean water. The prevailing belief among some medical professionals was that soaking your whole body too often could weaken your constitution or open your pores to disease. There were even doctors advising against baths during menstruation or pregnancy, claiming they could excite the nerves. So instead, you freshen up with a dry cloth, a prayer, and maybe a little lavender. And it's not just you. The entire city is winging it on hygiene. Even the upper classes, the ones with gold-framed portraits and chairs no one's allowed to sit in, aren't bathing like you'd expect. Queen Victoria herself reportedly took few full baths, favouring quick sponges and generous amounts of perfume. That's the elite solution. Just mask the funk. Drown it in roses and ambergris. Scholars are still debating how common regular bathing truly was. Some argue that working-class families made time for weekly wash-ups, especially after labour-heavy jobs. Others insist that such practices were rare, inconvenient and socially discouraged outside of medical necessity or religious ritual. The truth is probably a mix, but either way, no one smells good. At best, people smell like they've tried, and you're standing there damp, freezing, and only slightly cleaner than when you started. Your towel is a rough length of cloth that exfoliates you into a new personality. Your skin is now red and tight. Your scalp itches, and the back of your knee feels like it's sprouting a new species of fungus. You towel off and get dressed again. Same clothes, of course. Laundry is its own nightmare. We'll get there. So, you basically wear your outer layers until they achieve structural integrity like armour. If you're lucky, you have a fresh undershirt. If not, well, your outerwear will just have to absorb the consequences. Stepping back into the street, you realise with deep resignation that no one notices you're clean. You went through all that and you still smell like a fireplace and despair within minutes. But hey, Now you get to spend the rest of the day in damp boots and underlayers that cling in all the worst ways. Bathing in the Victorian era isn't refreshing, it's not relaxing, it's barely functional. It's a mix of awkward logistics, communal embarrassment, and vague fear that you're harming your body with every wash. Honestly, you're not sure you want to try it again. And yet, just wait. Because compared to the alternatives, especially what you'll see in public baths, today's little zinc tub might start to feel like a spa day. You've officially dried off, changed into the same crusty shirt you wore yesterday, and now it's time to deal with your hair. Yes, that situation. After your semi-bath, your scalp feels weird. Half oily, half stripped. Like it's confused about what decade it's in. You pat your head, and your hair crackles slightly. That can't be good. You reach for the hairbrush provided by your boarding house. It's made of wood, rough bristles, and the accumulated strands of several previous users. Lovely. There's something sticky on the handle. You try not to think about it. Victorian personal grooming is not for the faint of heart, or for anyone really. So let's talk about the hair washing schedule of the average 19th century person. If you thought monthly bathing was rare, hair washing was even more so. Once a month would be ambitious. Once every couple of months. That's more like it. For many, the solution to greasy hair was to brush it a lot. You sit by the window dragging the coarse brush through your scalp and wondering how many Victorian children got concussions trying to tame a tangle. For shampoo, there isn't any. Not in the modern sense. If you're rich and a little experimental, you might mix egg yolks, brandy, and a splash of rainwater into a thick, questionable paste. The rest of the population just uses the same basic soap they use for everything else. Bodies, dishes, laundry regrets. This miracle bar doesn't just clean, it also dries your hair into straw and leaves it smelling like old lard. Charming. Some historical recipes call for additions like rosemary vinegar or castor oil, though that last one makes your hair slick enough to qualify as a weapon in close combat. Speaking of oil, here's a quirky little gem. One popular Victorian hair tonic was made of bear grease, real bear, allegedly great for hair growth, probably better for attracting actual bears. Once you're done brushing, you start noticing the lice, or at least you imagine you do. Everyone had them. Lice, fleas, nits, the whole parasitic party. It wasn't shameful, it was just life. There was even special fine ticking, which sounds cute until you remember what that actually involves. You picture some poor kid sitting by candlelight, their mother scraping through their scalp like she's panning for gold. You catch your reflection in the cracked mirror. Your hair is now fluffy in all the wrong places, flat where it shouldn't be, and somehow both frizzy and wet. You consider trimming it, but realise the only scissors around are the rusty ones used for tailoring and possibly minor surgery. Pass. Men at least had the full back of pomades. These were thick, waxy concoctions used to slick the hair down into rigid styles that didn't move for days. Sometimes they were made with petroleum jelly, sometimes beef fat, sometimes mysterious oils with names like macaza. In fact, macassar oil was so ubiquitous and so greasy that people started placing decorative cloths over the backs of chairs to protect the upholstery. They were called antimacassars. The Victorians literally invented a furniture accessory just to deal with your greasy head. You step outside again, hair feeling heavier than it did 20 minutes ago, and you instantly blend in. The city is full of unwashed heads. Some are tucked under bonnets, others hidden by top hats, but they all share that slightly singed, vaguely animal aroma. Hair in this era is more about containment than beauty. If it's tied back, pinned up or plastered into place, you're doing fine. Now here's where it gets strange. Victorians were absolutely obsessed with hair. Not washing it, mind you, but keeping it. It was common to collect hair from loved ones, weave it into jewellery, or even incorporate it into art. You might see a framed picture on someone's wall and the floral design. It's all made of carefully knotted human hair. Morbid maybe, but in an age of high mortality and low photography, a lock of hair was often the only tangible keepsake. Some even believed in the health benefits of brushing 100 strokes a day. It wasn't just about smoothing knots. It was a ritual, a moment of vanity in a world of grime. Ladies would sit by the fire and brush until their arms were tired, hoping to bring a little lustre to hair that hadn't seen water since Christmas. Of course, there's scholarly debate about how often people truly clean their hair. Diaries and etiquette guides suggest that some upper-class women wash their hair more frequently, but these references are rare and often vague. Did they mean a full wash or just a rinse? Did servants do the work? Or were people simply reporting the idea of cleanliness more than the reality? As usual with history, we're left piecing together the puzzle from gossip or letters and the occasional suspiciously shiny portrait. You pass a barber shop, more of a corner shack with a blood-stained apron hanging on the door. Inside, a man is having his beard trimmed with what looks like garden shears. You notice there's also a bowl of leeches in the corner. Of course, barbers were also surgeons in this era. You get your sideburns cleaned up and your boils drained in the same appointment. For women, hair was a project. Long, heavy, intricately styled and often fake. Extensions made of horsehair, wire frames and leftover braids from friends or relatives were all common. You might spend 2 hours assembling your look in the morning and still have it collapse if the humidity rose by lunchtime. And since there was no hairspray, people used starch, pins and pure determination to hold their hairstyles in place. You finally settle on tying your hair back. No pomade, no beer rinse, no bare fat, just a ribbon from the bedside drawer and a hope that the wind doesn't reveal too much scalp. There's something oddly comforting about knowing everyone around you is equally greasy. In Victorian London, personal appearance isn't about standing out. It's about surviving. You don't need to be the best groomed person in the room. You just need to not smell worse than the livestock. Still, you miss your shampoo, your conditioner, and your 3-step shower routine. But for now, you'll settle for knowing that at least your hair isn't held together by animal fat and false hope. Yet, you're feeling semi-human now, kind of. You've scraped the grime from your limbs, tortured your hair into obedience, and endured the psychological horror of community bathwater. But there's still one area you haven't dealt with yet. Your teeth. You catch your reflection again in the cracked mirror and flash yourself a smile. That's a situation. Time to brush or scrape or whatever the Victorians did to avoid their teeth turning into a mouthful of stalactites. You dig around the bedroom drawer and find what passes for a toothbrush. It's wooden, stiff, and possibly haunted. The bristles are made from animal hair, horsehair if you're lucky, pig bristle if you're not, or worse, a mystery blend. You hold it up to your face and immediately start negotiating with yourself. Do you really need to brush? Could you maybe just swish some vinegar and call it a day? But no, you've come this far. You're going full Victorian. So, in goes the bristly horror. There's no tube of toothpaste, of course. Instead, you're offered a small ceramic jar labelled dentifrice. Inside is a grey, chalky powder that smells vaguely like charcoal and mint. Some versions were just baking soda and crushed brick. Others included powdered cuttlefish bone or even burnt bread. There's a hint of soot in this one, likely leftover ash from last night's fire. Congratulations, your dental hygiene routine is also doubling as chimney cleaning. You dab your horrifying brush in the soot mixture and scrub. It tastes like sand and regret. The bristles bend unevenly and stab your gums, but the powder has an oddly pleasant cooling aftertaste, thanks to a sprinkle of peppermint oil, probably added as an afterthought to distract you from the overall experience of brushing with rocks. Now, let's talk about toothpaste alternatives. Some families made their own recipes, which included things like crushed eggshells, salt, and even powdered charcoal. Long before Instagram made it trendy, if you were a gentleman with a flair for self-destruction, you might have rinsed your mouth with ammonia. It brightened the teeth, yes, but at the cost of your enamel, dignity, and probably a few brain cells. Here's a charming fringe detail. Some wealthier folks used tooth soap, a literal soap bar meant for dental use. It didn't foam, so it didn't taste good, and it left your mouth feeling like you'd licked a candle. But it was fancy, which mattered. And if you really wanted to show off, you might carry a silver tongue scraper. Just something to casually whip out during dinner parties. Nothing screams refinement like scraping plaque in front of the pudding course. Dentistry in this era was, let's say, adventurous. Tooth pain. Your options were limited. There were travelling tooth pullers who'd yank your molars out in town squares while playing the fiddle to distract you. No anaesthesia, no sterilisation, just a strong arm and a wrench that doubled as a hammer. For a few coins, they'd even let you keep the tooth as a souvenir. Who needs an ovation when you've got showmanship? If you were middle class, you might visit a barber surgeon who doubled as a dentist. These were guys who cut hair, pulled teeth, set bones, and occasionally bled patients with leeches. True multitaskers. They rarely washed their hands, reused instruments without cleaning, and generally made things worse. But hey, at least they wore a vaguely professional-looking smock. The wealthy had more options. Actual dentists who used gold fillings, porcelain caps, and horrifying mouth props. Unfortunately, they often believed in things like mercury treatments and electric shock. P for jaw pain. So again, maybe not a huge improvement. You take a swig from a denture cleaning tonic that smells like fennel and nail polish. It burns your tongue but leaves a slightly herbal aftertaste, refreshing in a witch's potion kind of way. Now, here's the big scholarly debate. How bad were Victorian teeth really? Some argue that since sugar wasn't as omnipresent in every food group, cavities were less common. Others point out that diets were high in coarse grains and acidic foods, and people often cracked or wore down their teeth from biting into unprocessed hard fare. Historical skeletons show a mix, some remarkably intact mouths, others resembling broken piano keys. But what everyone agrees on is this: when teeth did go bad, it was brutal. You pass a shop window advertising artificial teeth. The display includes a creepy velvet tray lined with porcelain molars and what looks like a full set of dentures made from real human teeth. Yes, real. Donated? No. Stolen from the dead. Often from battlefields, freshly buried corpses or executed prisoners. Waterloo teeth were a literal thing pulled from young soldiers who died in the Napoleonic Wars and sold to rich Victorians desperate for a decent smile. You wonder if the guy who smiled at you earlier had a mouthful of French lieutenant. It's a weird thought, but somehow it fits right in with the ambience. Fluoride wasn't in use yet. Neither was floss. Mouthwash was mostly alcohol or vinegar. People believed bad breath was a character flaw, a moral failing even, not a hygiene issue. So instead of brushing more, they'd chew cloves or carry little scented sachets to breathe through in polite company. Breath mints existed, but they were more like chalky candies, and if they didn't mask the stench, well, you could always blame your diet or blame bad humours. You finish brushing, your gums are bleeding slightly, but your mouth feels cleaner. Sort of. At least the soot paste did its job. You rinse with a splash of water from your cup and instantly feel the cold sting of something not quite right. Maybe it's the iron, or maybe it's the ghost of every unwashed Victorian mouth haunting this room. You decide to keep your mouth shut for the rest of the day, not out of shame, but because you're starting to suspect even talking too much might qualify as dental trauma in this era. At least now you understand why people in old portraits never smile. Between rotting teeth, cracked gums and the fear of sudden extraction, a closed-mouth smirk was the safest bet. And really, who had the energy to look cheerful when their mouth was a war zone? One last tip before you step out. If someone offers you tooth powder that fizzes on contact, run. It probably contains hydrochloric acid. Brightens your smile right up until your teeth dissolve. Now that your hair is freshly tortured and your teeth have been roughly sandblasted with soot and regret, it's time to face the next frontier of Victorian discomfort, clothing. More specifically, the underlayers. Because while everyone loves to romanticise the high collars, bustles, and long coats of the era, no one wants to talk about what's happening underneath. Brace yourself, because you're about to experience a very personal kind of horror: Victorian underwear. You rummage through the trunk beside your creaky bed and pull out your daily undergarments. They are stiff, yellowing linen drawers that tie at the waist with a string. No elastic, no softness. And here's the kicker, no crotch seam. Yes, they're completely open at the bottom, a feature, not a flaw. Welcome to the world of split crotch drawers, convenient for chamber pots, wildly inconvenient for dignity, and they are not under any circumstances washed daily or weekly. In many working class homes, underwear gets a rinse only when absolutely necessary. You might wear the same underclothes for several days, sometimes rotating between two sets if you're lucky enough to own more than one. Laundry, you'll quickly learn, is a whole production involving boiling water, caustic soap, and the physical stamina of a blacksmith. So, most people simply opt to air out their underthings near the fireplace and call it good enough. You pull them on, trying not to imagine who else has worn these before you. Because yes, clothes, including underclothes, were often shared or handed down. Siblings shared drawers, servants wore whatever was available, and thrift shops or rag and bone men sold bundles of second-hand garments, some of which came directly from the dead. That shirt you found yesterday, there's a non-zero chance it's seen its previous owner buried in it briefly. Now you had a chemise, a thin linen shift worn to protect your actual outer clothes from body sweat and, let's be honest, grime. These are your base layers, the only thing separating your skin from wool, soot, and horsehair. For women, this means corsets, petticoats, stays, and sometimes even padded bust enhancers. For men, it's layers of shirts, waistcoats, and thick drawers. And wool. So much wool. You already feel overheated just standing there, fully clothed but somehow still clammy. The garments cling in awkward places and leave gaps in others. Everything chafes. Your shirt collar is so stiff it might file your chin off by sundown. and the trousers feel like they were tailored by someone with a deep grudge against knees. Fun fact, most Victorian-era clothes were not made for comfort. They were designed to maintain modesty and social order. Even children were stuffed into layers of restrictive garments. Toddler boys wore dresses until they were breeched, usually around age 5 or 6. Girls were corseted young to train their posture, because nothing says childhood like rib caps, compression and lightheadedness. Now you might be wondering, how did anyone survive summer in all this? The answer, poorly. People fainted a lot, especially women in corsets, which were tightly laced and worn daily under multiple skirts and bodices. Some doctors argued corsets were responsible for a range of ailments, from fainting to organ displacement. Others claimed they were necessary for moral posture. Yes, morality apparently lived in your spine alignment. There's ongoing scholarly debate about just how dangerous corsets actually were. Some historians say the horror stories were exaggerated by reformers trying to shock the public. Others point to X-rays of corseted skeletons and period medical journals documenting fainting, shortness of breath, and digestive nightmares. It's likely both are true. Some women laced tightly for fashion or oral vanity, while others wore them looser, more like back support belts. But in either case, it wasn't a breathable experience. As you step outside into the crowded morning streets, you quickly realise your outfit, while appropriate, is doing absolutely nothing to keep you clean. In fact, it's becoming a sort of walking sponge. The dust from passing carts clings to your sleeves. A splash from a passing bucket horse cart gets your hem, and someone sneezes way too close to your shoulder. You're already due for another change. Good luck with that. You pass a woman hanging laundry on a line. The clothes are yellowed and stiff, steaming faintly in the chill air. She's using a flat iron heated on a coal stove and pinning each item carefully. But you notice something curious. No underclothes. That's because, for modesty's sake, people didn't hang drawers or chemises where others could see them. Underwear was considered shameful, even when clean. It had to be dried discreetly indoors, usually in front of the fireplace or behind a screen. Yes, wet socks on the line were fine, but underpants were outrageous. You keep walking, now fully clothed and uncomfortably aware of your body heat. It's like wearing a portable sauna made of wool, damp linen and a button-down shirt. The stiffness of the garments means your movement is slightly mechanical. You feel like a poorly dressed puppet, and it's not even lunchtime. Here's something peculiar. The word hygiene doesn't even exist in the way you know it. Cleanliness is seen as moral and social, not medical. So, while your underthings may be crusty and biologically alarming, as long as your outer garments are presentable and you don't look like you smell, you're socially acceptable. Appearances are everything. You catch sight of a vendor selling corset laces and ladies' necessities. One package promises to prevent fainting with strategic tension. It's a ribbon with a slightly elastic thread woven in. Early spandex, sort of. Another package claims to preserve virtue and silhouette. You don't ask. You don't want to know. Back in your room that evening, you begin the slow process of undressing, which is as exhausting as putting the clothes on in the first place. Every layer comes off with a soft sigh, like it's been waiting to breathe. You shake out your chemise and it releases a small cloud of dust. Maybe it's flour, maybe it's ash, maybe it's your will to live. You consider airing your undergarments by the fireplace like your host suggested. But then you remember that time she accidentally singed her bloomers. So instead, you drape everything over the edge of your bed, and pray that no one looks too closely or too long. Victorian underwear wasn't about comfort, it was about form, modesty, and surviving the season without boiling alive in your own clothes. And the real horror is you'll have to do it all again tomorrow. You wake to the sound of distant hooves and someone coughing like they're trying to expel their entire skeleton. The fire has gone cold, and your linens feel as though they've absorbed every particle of damp air in London. Your underclothes, which you aired by the hearth with cautious optimism, are now crispy in the wrong places and still suspiciously moist in others. It's a new day, and that means one thing: soap. You're finally going to find some actual honest-to-goodness soap. But Victorian soap is not the bar of lavender-scented self-care you're dreaming of. You quickly learn that there are two kinds of soap in this era. Fancy soap for people who have servants and everyone else's soap, which is one wrong ingredient away from being industrial lubricant. You know which one you're about to meet. You venture into the general store, which smells like dust and pickled onions. The soap is kept on a wooden shelf between a stack of waxed tapers and a jar of questionable molasses. The bar you're handed is greyish-brown, slightly squishy, and gives off the unmistakable scent of ashes, animal fat, and a hint of lye. It's not wrapped, it's not labelled, it's just soap. You buy it anyway, because the alternative is going back to brushing your armpits with a damp rag and positive thinking. Back in your cramped room, you prepare for what can loosely be described as a wash-up. You place your soap beside the cracked basin of cold water and try to psych yourself up. This is not going to be fun. You know this because Victorian soap is notoriously harsh. It's made by boiling animal fat with lye, a caustic substance that can, in the wrong quantities, dissolve flesh. In theory, the soap maker balances the mix perfectly. In reality, your bar feels like it might take your skin off along with the grime. You lather it in your hands and immediately regret everything. The suds are minimal. It sort of foams, but only after aggressive rubbing, and even then it behaves like it's attacking you. The smell doesn't improve with use. If anything, it intensifies. You catch hints of boiled cow and something vaguely metallic. A smell that implies the soap remembers its previous life as part of a livestock accident. Victorians were serious about their soap. Serious in that they believed it should be strong enough to remove not just dirt, but also shame, sin, and possibly your top layer of skin. You scrub your arms, wincing as the soap bites into a scratch you didn't know you had. Your fingers are raw within minutes, and your elbows feel like they've been sandblasted. Some people in this era believed soap had moral value. The cleaner you were, the more righteous. This idea was pushed especially hard by upper-class reformers who distributed soap to the poor, thinking it might cleanse not only bodies but also souls. The soap was often accompanied by a Bible verse and a lecture about virtue. You wonder if they ever actually used the stuff themselves. Doubtful. You rinse off with the coldest water this side of an Arctic expedition, and pat yourself dry with a rough towel that resembles burlap in both texture and comfort. Your skin feels oddly tight, like it's trying to retract into your bones. The bar of soap, now dented and oozing slightly, sits smugly in its dish. You cover it with a scrap of cloth just to avoid making eye contact. Let's pause here for a quirky fact. Victorians also used soap for the weirdest things. Some believed that placing a bar of soap in your bed could prevent leg cramps. Others carried slivers in their pockets as a folk cure for bad luck. And one particularly charming bit of pseudoscience involved inserting soap suppositories to cure constipation. Yep, that happened. No one knows who came up with it, but someone probably tried it more than once. You pack the soap away, already dreading the next time you have to use it. But at least now you have the tiniest sense of accomplishment. You've joined the elite few who have washed with true Victorian grit, literally. Out in the street you start noticing who else is freshly scrubbed or attempting to be. A few men carry bars wrapped in muslin tucked into their coat pockets like badges of virtue. Children sell soap door to door, offering blessed versions said to heal both the body and the spirit. There's even a travelling soap man who shouts rhymes about cleanliness and occasionally bursts into impromptu sermons. Still, most people don't use it daily. Soap costs money, water takes effort, and for many the idea of washing every day is excessive, even suspicious. Some think it weakens the body. Others just don't have the time, and plenty of Victorians still adhere to the idea that if you look clean enough, that's what counts. Real cleanliness is for Sundays, job interviews, and when you're trying to marry up. Of course, scholars have long argued over how widespread soap use really was. Some letters and diaries suggest that working-class families used it frequently, especially women doing laundry. Others paint a grimmer picture, one where soap was scarce, expensive, and sometimes reserved for washing clothes rather than bodies. It probably varied depending on region, class, and whether or not you lived near someone who made their own. And yes, some people made their own soap at home, which sounds charming until you realise it involves boiling animal bones and fat in a cauldron with wood ash, while praying you don't end up with explosive lye burns. It also smells worse than a cheese factory explosion, so you can understand why many opted to just stay dirty. By the end of the day, you're back to square one. Cleanish, maybe. Your arms itch a little, your skin feels stripped, but your face no longer shines with coal dust and regret. You count that as a win. You wrap your soap in a clean rag and place it reverently in the drawer. Maybe it's Stockholm Syndrome. Maybe it's the mild euphoria of not smelling like a barn. Either way, the bar's growing on you. But don't get too comfortable. Tomorrow brings the next challenge. The complicated world of chamber pots, slop buckets, and the fine art of window-tossed waste. The sun's barely up, and already you're dealing with an existential crisis. It's not the soap this time, though. That grey puck still haunts your senses, is something more urgent, more primal. You have to pee, and perhaps more. And unfortunately the concept of indoor plumbing hasn't quite caught on yet in your part of Victorian London. So, today's little adventure begins with the humble and wholly unsanitary chamber pot. You glance over at the squat ceramic bowl sitting discreetly under your bed. It has delicate blue floral patterns on the outside, which is misleading considering its purpose. This pot, charmingly referred to as a gezunder, is your only in-room option for relieving yourself. There is no bathroom. There is no flush. This is it. The toilet is the bowl, and the walls are thin. You lift the pot with as much dignity as you can muster, which isn't much. There's already something sloshing at the bottom, probably yours from last night, or maybe your host's. You don't ask, you just get on with it. Using a chamber pot is humbling. It's not graceful. There's balancing involved. Aim is critical. And if you mess up, well, there's no backup pot. Once finished, you stare at the pot, now a little fuller, and wonder what to do with it. That's when you remember the morning ritual, the dump. In a city still clinging to pre-plumbing infrastructure, disposing of human waste is a team effort. Households collect their slop buckets, chamber pots, and other bodily byproducts and empty them out, preferably into a cesspit in the backyard, but not always. In cities where cesspits overflow and get expensive to empty, many opt for a more direct route, the window. Guardello, they shout, a bastardised cry from the French. Regard l'eau, watch out for the water. Though let's be honest, it's not just water. You now understand the term night soil isn't poetic. It's very, very literal. You peek out your window. Below, the narrow alley is already slick with life.